Iniciamos la cobertura del Mobile World Congress 2012, un año más en Barcelona. La verdad que el tiempo pasa cada vez más rápido y tenemos con nosotros a Andy Germano para iniciar esta sesión de entrevistas. Andy Germano es el Vice Chairman del Small Cell Forum,
sí.
Que era antes el Femto Forum y que la semana pasada cambió de nombre para llamarse el Small Cell Forum para aglutinar un poco más lo que son las tecnologías pequeñas o diríamos la infraestructura más pequeña para los operadores móviles y no solo lo que eran las femtocells. O sea, ellos van a estar aglutinando una serie de dispositivos y él nos va a comentar un poquito. Andy, welcome to Telesemana here at Mobile World Congress.
Hello.
So far nothing to comment on the show, right? I mean, you haven't been able to.
It's actually been busy, even though the show's only been open for 1 hour. We have had a lot of interest in the small cell. There's a big area that's it's a small cell, but it's growing very quickly. So we're seeing the deployments quadrupling, over year with new operators deploying these small cell technology.
Okay, now tell us, you announced last week that you were changing your name from
Yes.
Femto Forum to Small Cell Forum. Tell us why this change?
It's a very significant change. We had the femtocells, and the femtocells have some excellent economics in terms of low cost, small size, self-organizing capability. And so what we started to see over the past year is originally femtocells were being used mainly in the home. Then suddenly last year we saw about 1/3 of the new deployments were going to the enterprise. And now we're starting to see deployments in rural areas, outdoor networks. So what we've done is natural and logical in the sense that we're expanding the scope of the forum to cover these new areas. So not just femtocells, but also picocells, microcells, metrocells, and rural area cells.
Okay. We've seen a small tendency, not a small tendency, it's going to be a big tendency, but it has started, it seems like last year when Alcatel-Lucent announced the light radio product, very small.
Yes.
And we're seeing, since then, different companies or OEMs offering smaller and smaller base stations and infrastructure.
Yes.
Is that something that's going to be part of the reasoning of going towards that path in terms of just not being concentrating on the femtocells, but the whole bunch of?
Exactly. We've seen within the Femto Forum a great execution of representation to get some of these new concepts into the standards like 3GPP and 3GPP2 so that the mobile operators can leverage the economies of scale represented by global standards. And what we're seeing now with these new areas like a light radio and the picocell is the ability to also bring them into an area of representation so we can make it more standard for interoperability between different vendors' products, and it's something that is happening, and we expect to see it accelerating in the next year.
Okay, tell us, there are also, I'm not going to mention names, but there is a big manufacturer that doesn't seem to think that a small infrastructure is going to be key, like this light radio and this kind of infrastructure is too soon to actually to be implemented. What would be the reasoning or the defense against that argument that we are not ready for going that small yet, that operators need to go still big,
Yes.
and it's going to take several years before they are actually ready to invest in small deployments?
It's a very interesting question in the sense that with our new scope, our expanded scope from femtocells, including metrocells and microcells and picocells, we've seen a number of new members now joining, not just at the member level, but also at the board level within the small cell forum, because they're seeing the representation now, including other technologies like Wi-Fi integration and picocells. So we've seen more interest in the forum with the expanded scope. And then what we're also seeing with 4G technologies like LTE, once you get to these higher order modulations, 100 megabits, you really need a smaller cell to get that good service. So small cells and some of the concepts that go with small cells like backhaul, suddenly, instead of having 100 macro cells, you maybe have 10,000 small cells. It creates management, so we have used like a TR69 so you can remotely manage the small cells. Now we have some work items in the forum to look at small cell backhaul, and so we're starting to see not only a huge growth and a huge adoption in the small cells, but also a large interest for 4G technologies to make sure that last year we announced that there's more small cells in the world than there are macro cells on 3G. This year, we will announce that there's more small cells than all macro cells, not just 3G macro cells. So we're seeing a huge growth, and what it's done is it's really changed the network, the way the network looks from a big cell, big cell, big cell, big cell to a big cell, but then many small cells within. So we don't see the big cell going away, but we see the small cells as a really nice complement to the big cell architecture.
Okay, you mentioned rural as a factor to expand your you said home, enterprise, and rural. Obviously in Latin America, home probably, or in emerging markets, home is out of the question because of the business model.
Yes.
But then you have business, which probably it's in the equation,
important, yes.
And then rural.
Yes.
So tell us what you have seen in terms of the disparities that you're seeing in places like the US, where Sprint and AT&T, I think, or Verizon are already selling femtocells for their home.
Yes.
And perhaps other emerging markets, I don't know, China or Korea or any, no, well, Korea is not emerging, but any other emerging economies where you're seeing deployments of femtocells. So tell us what's the dynamic here.
So we've seen some really interesting examples of the femtocells and the small cells in the past year. So we had an example in Japan where SoftBank was using small cells on the remote islands. So it was not cost effective to put a tower up on a remote island because there's really not enough people to justifying the cost. But they had some coverage requirement from the government for the frequency, and so they actually used our small cells and a satellite backhaul link to cover the island that was previously had no coverage. Then we had two really interesting examples. This week you'll hear in our booth, in the Small Cell Forum booth.
Tell us the number of your booth, just in case somebody sees this video from the show.
We're in Hall 1, and the location is 1G19.
1G19, okay.
1G19. So SoftBank will make a presentation today where they're talking about like they had a disaster, awful situation with the tsunami in Japan, and they lost 80% of the big towers in the area that was the devastation. And what they're able to do with the small cells is they're able to quickly roll in with a vehicle and a satellite backhaul service for the people, so the family can call and make sure people are okay. And they provided charging stations, and so it was really a heartfelt, a really nice way to quickly cover an area in a disaster. And we saw a similar situation in Thailand where they had a big flooding last year. And they had no service, and people were very uncomfortable to lose the mobile phone and lose the connectivity. And it was a place in the community where everybody could come together and charge their device and make some calls and get some service using the small cell with the satellite.
Okay. All right, let's talk about different technologies, because you obviously concentrate on the femtocell, and at some point you could argue that there was some sort of competition between the femtocells and the UMA. The universal mobile access for using Wi-Fi and the waveways. And now we're seeing that Wi-Fi is also gaining a lot of momentum to offload. So how do you are going to be integrating the concept of the femtos, which was based on the notion of using the existing licensed spectrum from the operator, but in a smaller range, in a smaller area, with Wi-Fi?
That's a really good question. There's been a lot of activity within the forum this year. So I've used the UMA, and I think it's a nice service, but the problem they had, why it didn't take off, was you needed a client on the mobile phone. So it didn't work with every phone, whereas the femtocell, it works with every phone. You don't need a special software client. The other thing is the voice quality, like voice over Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi traffic is good for web surfing, but for streaming, it's not so good. So with our integrated femto Wi-Fi, we just published a white paper this week. We have shown how you can use the femtocell to help make the Wi-Fi more secure.
Okay.
And also, Wi-Fi is difficult for people because you have to type in the SSID, then you have to log in. When you have a mobile phone, you don't log in. You just turn it on and you make a phone call, it's working. So with integrated femto and Wi-Fi, you can use all the security and all the knowledge of who I am as a subscriber, and you can log me into my Wi-Fi service, to my femto service. So now you have a situation where the network is intelligent, and if I'm streaming a video, the quality maybe is better over 3G or 4G. Let the phone decide, let the network decide. Don't make the consumer have to decide, the SSID and these technical things. So that's what the integrated femto Wi-Fi allows you to do.
Are you working at all with the Wi-Fi Alliance, which by the way are coming, I think, after you?
Ah, yes. We recognize the Wi-Fi Alliance has a great representation for the Wi-Fi community. So the work within the Small Cell Forum is not trying to replicate or duplicate or take over any of the Wi-Fi efforts that go on in there with 802.11n and MIMO and all the activities there. It's really the complement. It's where these areas overlap in the sense that we've seen a lot of activity from the mobile operators to have Wi-Fi hot zones and to really do data offloading. And so what we're trying to help is on the overlap areas with the integration. And we're definitely interested in discussions with the Wi-Fi Alliance to make sure that there's a good synchronization and working together on these topics.
Okay. Two more questions very quickly. Standardization. There was an issue, not an issue, but it was something that was discussed last year, that a reason why Femtos were not taking off because they need some standardization or interoperability and so on.
Yes.
And then the APIs, which I think you made an announcement last week as well about the APIs. So tell us just those two things very quickly.
Excellent. So on the standardization, what we've done is we came out with an interface called the IUH interface. And the IUH interface is interoperability between different vendors' Femto access points and the core network infrastructure. So all these access points, they actually connect back into the network over a secure connection, and it allows them to be remotely managed and deployed, and the service connects in so that it's just like a regular macro station, but in a small cell. So the interoperability, we've sponsored different plug fests. So we've had 3 or 4 plug fests now where all the vendors came together and tested the equipment, and we plan to continue to have these plug fests moving forward.
How close are we to have a situation where that we see on the macro cells where the operator just puts infrastructure from everybody and it works perfectly?
Yeah, I think it's possible now. I think what we've seen to date is the initial deployments are single vendor. So they just, in the early stage, they usually just pick one vendor to provide both ends. But the standard is there to allow it to be plug and play with multiple vendors. And I think in the next year or two, we'll start to see some multi-vendor network deployments.
Okay. Finally, the APIs. Tell us why those are important first, and then what's the advancement on that situation on the APIs?
The APIs represent the services. So when you have the small cells, there's some very unique services you can do, because now, let's say we're covered by a small cell in this area. When the person's coming in, different things can happen on the mobile phone. So applications and services. So you can control your home. Maybe I live in Florida, so it's very hot, and I have air conditioning, which can be expensive. And sometimes if I leave home and I forget to turn off the air conditioning, it's just wasting the environment. So with the femtocell, you can have home controls, you can have reminders, you can have personal shopping. People like to go shopping, and when they go to a nice store, they want to be recognized. Maybe I went to the store yesterday and I spent a lot of money on a nice suit. And then I say, oh, I forgot to get a belt, and I go back the next day, but it's a different person. So they don't recognize me, and I feel like, hey, I should be important. With the small cell, you have the ability to have a VIP service. So when I come back to the store, they recognize me and say, oh, Andy's here. Let's make sure we take care of him. He's a good shopper. So there's a lot of nice services you can have with this. And so what we've done within the forum is we published an API to allow the development community to be able to write these applications easily. And so what we announced...
That will allow some LBS applications, like really tight.
Exactly. So LBS exists in the macro, and there's a lot of things you can do in the macro, but what we offer is consistency. Like you may have a store that's in the basement, so it doesn't see the GPS or it doesn't see the triangulation, whereas with the small cell, you can guarantee to have that service everywhere, whether it's in the basement, in the attic, anywhere.
All right. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. You're the first in our video, so congratulations.
Excellent. Thank you. Gracias.
And see you next time.
Sounds good. See you soon.
All right.